Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. I hereby inaugurate the Abraham Lincoln Secession Civil War Mid-1800s Development Series, for a broad description. And now let's just call it the Abraham Lincoln Series. To begin a new series, the Lincoln Nobody Knows, this will fit within the American History Series. But we're going to start looking at President Lincoln and the Civil War in depth. I initiated this project to try to figure out a little bit more about why libertarians hate Lincoln so bad. And perhaps we can bring a little bit of light to this subject outside of, I think the only people studying Lincoln and the Civil War in depth now are these wacky libertarians. So we'll try to bring a little bit of light to the subject and give Lincoln a little bit of credit for being the great man that he is. So here we are with the Lincoln Nobody Knows, copyright 1958 by Richard Current, C-U-R-R-E-N-T. Now normally we would start off with the year he was born, the town he was born in and stuff. That's fine, we'll happen across that information as we go along. If you want the dry things like that, just go to Wikipedia. I'm going to give you, first of all, here's a couple little things he wrote, a few little notes he wrote, found in his private papers, where he's playing with words and terms. Listen to these. Quote, he said he was riding bass-ackwards on a jass-ack through a patten-cotch on a pair of battle-sags, stuffed full of binger-gred, when the animal steered at a scump, and the lirrup-stether broke, and throwed him in the forner of the kents, and broke his pishing pole. Right. Here's another one. Quote, he said about Bray Dake that he came to himself, ran home, seized up a stick of wood, and split the axe to make a light, rushed into the house, and found that the door sick abed and his wife standing open. So there, instead of switching the first letter of a word, he switches two words in the context. I don't know what he was doing with it. Just wanted to start off with something a little strange. Come down just a bit, and we're on page 7 here. Some lines from his favorite poem. Now, there's a poem by Burton Braley, Why Should a Mortal Be Proud, or something like that. And this is apparently the version that inspired Burton Braley to write his version, because this is not the version Burton Braley wrote. Oh, why should the spirit of mortal be proud, like a swift-flitting meteor or fast-flying cloud, a flash of the lightning, a break of the wave, he passes from life to his rest in the grave. 'Tis the wink of an eye, 'tis the draught of a breath, from the blossom of health to the paleness of death, from the gilded saloon to the bier and the shroud. Oh, why should the spirit of mortal be proud? That's his favorite poem. He didn't even know who wrote it. And apparently the man who wrote a Scottish writer, I think. We'll happen on that information a bit later. Now, I wish that this book were particularly thick with good stuff to quote, but it's not. So we're skipping now down to page 58, because in the intervening pages there's virtually nothing worth talking about. It goes on endlessly. It's probably 15 or 20 pages in there about what he looked like. According to the recollections of New Salem friends, recorded by this guy Herndon, who Lincoln knew, Lincoln, when in his 20s, was a skeptic among skeptics. Now, you gotta like the guy for this. Whatever else they may, and there's this whole bunch of people who say that Lincoln had a religious conversion once he got elected, essentially, in the years after his election. And we're going to go over that evidence. This author we're taking from here seems to agree with that very much so, thinks that Lincoln became a deist of some sort, or a theist of some sort, during the Civil War, during his time in office. But seems to admit, up until his time in office, Lincoln was a bit of an atheist, a bit of a skeptic. So we're going to look over that information and see how we feel about it. But continuing the quote, he was a skeptic among skeptics. He read books like Thomas Paine's Age of Reason and discussed them approvingly in the tavern and the village store. In 1834, he wrote an essay to show that the Bible was not God's inspired word, nor Jesus, God's divine Son. I mean, to deny the divinity of Jesus doesn't that automatically put you in purgatory or something? Actually, I don't know what purgatory is, but isn't that bad? But maybe this is proof that there is a God, because by denying Jesus' divinity, God was so mad he brought the Civil War down on Lincoln's head. No, I'm kidding. That's ridiculous. When Lincoln brought this manuscript with him to the store, his employer snatched the pages from him and threw them into the stove. Personal anecdote. I borrowed The Virtue of Selfishness to a friend of mine in high school once on the debate team. Bit of a friend. And he gave it back to me a few days later. He said his father had seen it, sitting with his school books and stuff. And his father got really mad and said, "Take this out of the house. I don't want to see this kind of crap in here anymore. This is stupid." His father was very angry about this situation. Wouldn't have the faintest clue what was in the book. Continuing the quote. According to one of his closest friends, Lincoln was still enthusiastic in his infidelity when he first moved to Springfield. In 1838, he carried his enthusiasm with him on his visits to the office of the county clerk. Quote, "He would come into the clerk's office where I and some young men were writing and staying," the unnamed friend recalled, "and would bring the Bible with him, would read a chapter and argue against it. So he'd just come in and sit down and open it up and say, 'Paul on Mars Hill, let's talk about this.' And he would just go through it systematically and argue against the chapter. This is a hobby of Lincoln, the man that the libertarians despise. If these reports are true, Lincoln seems at least a bit two-faced in those years of his political apprenticeship. For in public statements, he praised the books which in private arguments he denounced." Now, you'll see that's a bit of a strong statement, that he praised the books that in private he denounced. Did he really praise the Bible? Because he links it, we'll see later, he lists the Bible among the world's great literature. He says it's got to be studied like all great literature. He puts it in with Shakespeare and stuff. It is not God's perfect immortal book. So even when he's president of the United States, although he doesn't come out and say the Bible's ass, he does say it has to be read. We have to read the Bible, as all great world literature is important. So if you read between the lines, as the author says here, Lincoln seems a bit two-faced in those years. In public statements he praised the book, in private he denounced it. Did he praise it in public, and is he really two-faced? And if you read between the lines, is there really not a context you can get? So let's keep that in our pocket and watch for that, shall we? As a candidate for the state legislature, he wrote an address to the people of Sangamon County, Sangamon County, March 9, 1832, for publication in the Sangamo Journal, urging state-supported education. Now, this is one of the things the libertarians will bring up, but, George Washington supported the establishment of the fur factory system in the early United States, so certainly not a virtue, but not a culminating vice. He mentioned the, quote, "advantages and satisfactions to be derived from all being able to read the Scriptures and other works, both of a religious and moral nature, for themselves."